I've reviewed a lot of bad books on this channel, but amid the exhaustive anthologies, apocalyptic circle jerking, and AI slop, one title has cropped up like a stubborn rash. One title that has cemented itself in the literary zeitgeist as one of the most bafflingly insane stories ever put to print. A little novel called Empress Theresa. I've definitely heard of this book, but I've never actually investigated beyond those brief mentions. Maybe I just don't like seeking out things that would actively cause me pain. I mean, is that really a bad thing? But soon it became clear just how much of a presence this book had among folks of all persuasions, so the time was right to finally check it out. Oh boy, so this is where we're at. Why do her fingers look like they were broken and reset improperly? Why does her face suggest she's a descendant of Ecce Mono? Why do all the soldiers have vestigial legs growing sideways out their bodies? Where even are they? Who out there is pouring multiple square miles worth of plain concrete for no reason? Why does the whole thing look like a third grader's crayon drawing? Why am I even doing this to myself? It's also worth noting there are alternate versions of this cover art, and somehow they're all worse. Hey Theresa, maybe lay off the bear claws? You're looking a little puffy these days. And don't even get me started on what's going on in the thoracic department. I'll give credit where it's due though. I've never seen a non-Euclidean rack before today. Or this one, some fascinating geography at play, where lush meadows abruptly give way to rolling desert hills, in which a developer thought would be optimal real estate for 3 pointless buildings. Theresa herself looks like she's the missing link between man and Simpson. And once again, I cannot comment on the Chestel situation. I can only assume it was the result of a prosthetic surgeon who was both incompetent and determined. Norman Boutin is the author of this thing, and at first glance he resembles a sweet old grandpa. It's only when you actually Google his name you'll find the true extent of his, proclivities. My god, there's a whole wiki about him. I must say though, if people put this much effort into solving the world's problems, we'd have peace in 3 days. Oh, for the love of. Norman Boutin and criticism. Norman Boutin and conspiracies. Norman Boutin and his ego, religion, lies, English, elitism, reality, racism. Where am I? I can already tell I won't be able to give the Norman Boutin lore the representation it deserves in this video, so I'll try and be as succinct and neutral as possible. He's an absolute fucking nutjob. When this book came out and drew the ire of readers around the globe, Norm waged a holy crusade against his critics, on the battlefield of Amazon reviews and Catholic writing forums, armed with insults, bad faith arguments, doubling down, and accusations of not having read the book. Norm quickly established himself as a grade A lolcow, and it appears he sparked quite the anti-fandom as a result. He also spouts his reductive and ethnocentric perspective on world affairs, has allegedly claimed stolen valor, and at one point used his sister's cancer diagnosis as a club and shield against criticism of his book. So yeah, this is a certified goofball with a real POS streak. He reminds me of a more chronically online Derek Savage. At least with Derek, there's an amusing naivete that keeps people from rejecting him outright. But based on what I've seen, I am not fond of Norman Boutin, to put it lightly. And now, I'm reviewing his book. Okay, I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm belaboring the point, or delaying the inevitable, but there is still a goldmine's worth of Norm to tap into, such as the official Empress Theresa website. Sheesh, and I thought DerekSavage.com was amateur. I can recreate this in Google Docs right now. But that's just style. Content-wise, the website's entire homepage is just a long-winded vomitorium of text defending and hyping the book. How many stories do you know that are about an American teenage girl, take place in the present-day United States, have no foul language, no objectionable situations, political agendas, references to race or LGBT, violence? Okay, ignoring everything else that's wrong with that sentence, at least half of those things are in Empress Theresa. I'm guessing it's because if he approves of the context it's in, then it's not morally objectionable, especially if he was the one writing it. Newsflash, Norm, even if you don't take issue with depicting a specific instance of violence or objectionable situations, there's still violence and objectionable situations. You can't escape that. It's our curse as writers. But, of course, you presumably understand that, being a writer yourself. A lot of the homepage is also dedicated to responses to internet trolls who criticized his book. One reviewer claimed there were parts of the novel that were complete agony because nothing was happening. And Norm's rebuttal was to allege there were 34 spectacular and riveting events in the book, and that makes it frantically paced. Firstly, I'm not sure what you consider spectacular and riveting events, Norm. This just reeks of, we investigated ourselves and found nothing wrong. Secondly, just because you're depicting something exciting doesn't mean it automatically invokes thrill in the reader. It's not just what you write, it's how you write it. But of course, you presumably understand that, being a writer yourself. And thirdly, having exciting sequences doesn't change the fact that there are still agonizing portions of this book where nothing happens. There is a 60-page sequence in this book that's just a transcription of a news documentary recapping events that happened off-page. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Another reviewer branded the book as Christian propaganda, and Norm replied by saying all the references to God in the book would only take up a page and a half. What he leaves out, however, is that said references to God and religion are preachy and heavy-handed. All it takes is one line to change the entire context of the story, Norm.
But of course, you presumably understand that being a writer yourself.
And at the end of the day, his blanket response to critics is to deem them little people for their efforts to ridicule him, while people who praise the book are great for encouraging him to be great. Norm, if critiquing your shitty book makes me little, then we're just gonna... One second. Alright, so this is how we're gonna do the review. I present to you Empress Theresa. At the age of 10, Theresa Sullivan merges, I guess, with a celestial entity made of light, whom she nicknames Hal, after 2001: A Space Odyssey. There is zero relation between the two besides the name. And as she matures, she learns that Hal has endowed her with absurdly powerful abilities of strength and telekinesis, like she's basically God. And as the world turns its attention to her, she turns her attention to the world to solve its problems and ultimately reshape it into a better place. I don't even know where to start with this thing. I guess the central premise, where Theresa is this omnipotent super being who becomes world famous and she uses her powers to address its issues. So before all this happens, the President of the United States tries to eliminate her by sending her into the stratosphere with an atom bomb and blowing her up. But she survives this by jumping out of the plane with empty Coke bottles stuffed into her thermal suit so she'll float when she hits the water. Despite being 12 miles up in the air already, despite already being possessed by the Holy Spirit of Hal. If you thought that was irredeemably stupid, strap on your aluminum hats tighter. We're just getting started. Apparently, the energy Hal sent out to preserve Theresa stopped the wind around the world, which means no rainfall for crops, so Theresa's solution is to work out a program with Hal to create giant water spouts in the oceans that send water throughout the atmosphere. And to further cement her commitment to agriculture, she tilts Earth on its axis to give it an endless summer. And because of this, ice caps melt, the ocean levels rise and fall several feet casually, entire mountain ranges have to be brought up from the ocean's floor to absorb the impact of tsunamis, and there are zero repercussions or consequences. Reading these passages where Theresa casually alters the world's geography was like getting stabbed in the head. Norm goes to great lengths to explain the science behind it all with this technical language and pages worth of explaining, but it's still completely ridiculous and impossible. Raising the Atlantic Ocean by 4 feet did not incur the deaths of hundreds of millions of people. Did they all just sell their houses and move? Moving and shifting millions of square miles of silt and rock from the seafloor does nothing to ocean currents, tectonic plates, or weather patterns either. Minecraft has a better grasp of geology than this fucking book. And summoning a ring of diamonds to orbit Earth and shine permanent daylight does nothing to countless organisms' circadian rhythms and life cycles, nor their global temperature. I guess she can summon some of those Neptunian ice crystals from Jimmy Neutron to cool things down. At least that show is more scientifically sound. Theresa's world meddling does not stop there. She summons precious metals from outer space to rain down on Earth and make entire countries richer. She creates booming oil fields and sells the stuff for $10 a barrel, completely undercutting the Middle Eastern market. She builds a land bridge from Israel to Crete, so the Israelis can escape Arab hostilities and resettle in an island she raised in the North Atlantic. She disables every weapon in North Korea and breaks generations worth of social conditioning by quoting the Declaration of Independence? The complete misunderstanding of the world and its workings is the foundation of this book, where the very concept of material reality is tossed around like building blocks. And it's all played straight, like it's supposed to be uplifting and awe-inspiring, instead of making me want to shrink into my own skin from cringing so hard. Norm's solutions for the world's problems is basically just the equivalent of telling homeless people to buy houses. It's arrogant, it's uninformed, I'd even call it jingoist, and worst of all, it's stupid. This is Norm's world and we're just living in it. Why can't we just all be like Norm and Boutin? So remember what I said about consequences and repercussions? Well, let's discuss characters. Besides Theresa herself, and trust me, we'll get to her, the cast of characters is mainly this cadre of world leaders and allies who agree with everything Theresa says and does. Absolutely no one has any misgivings about these worldwide upheavals she proposes. At one point, she moves Europa, as in Jupiter's moon, Europa, into Mars's orbit for easier access. And everyone's just like, wow, thanks. They all sound the same too. Bland exposition vessels whose only trait is their admiration of Theresa. And they talk in the same over-explanatory pseudoscientific manner I mentioned before. It's that scene from Batman and Robin people like to meme on.
Sunlight could reverse a freezing process.
Well, sunrise in for 5 hours.
But it's morning in the Congo.
If we could relay the sunlight
From the other side of the equator.
It'll take the satellites about a minute to realign.
Horrific. And of course, we can't ignore the main attraction. Theresa herself. According to Norm, the inspiration for the character of Theresa Hartley, née Sullivan, was Joan of Arc and Tanya Harding. Finally, the crossover we've always wanted. Norm insists that Theresa is a role model, a wonderful girl who does a lot of good, a God-fearing icon we can't help but love. Endowing your protagonist with an all-powerful space orb already runs the risk of making her irritatingly boring and unrealistic. But to my genuine surprise, that's exactly what happened. Theresa always has a solution for whatever dilemma she faces. Everything comes easy, and everything works out perfectly. If consequences do occur, her response is to push harder and change things more, instead of showing any semblance of introspection, hesitance, or humility. How exactly is that a good thing? How does that make her a role model for anyone not already endowed with an all-powerful space orb? Norm insists that Theresa's modest background and her occupation as a student make her relatable to everyone on a common level. That's not true, Norm. What makes characters relatable is how they think and how they handle the situations they're in, not what they are. You could write a story about a Mongolian nuclear physicist with an Ivy League education, but if his thoughts, emotions, flaws, and hardships are realistic and substantive, he becomes relatable. Even to a blue-collar Midwestern woman in her 40s picking up a book for the first time in 20 years. And yes, even to a student. Theresa is not relatable. She talks like a supercomputer. She was given her powers by random chance. She is idolized on a worldwide scale. And when a terrorist crashes his car into her and paralyzes her, she still manages to heal herself in the end. Handicapped kids, you too can heal your conditions. All you need is an all-powerful space orb, like Theresa. What, you don't have one of those? Why not? Why can't you relate to Theresa? Well, enjoy reduced mobility, you scrubs. To the book's very little credit, it does address the realities of an otherwise normal person burdened with unfathomable power and responsibility, but it's given no attention beyond a line or two here and there. This could have been interesting. What if Theresa couldn't handle the pressures of having the world's eye on her, and that manifested in her losing control of her powers? It could be a commentary on viral fame, or some allegory for making the leap to adulthood and finally having to face the world and its problems. But no, let's just build land bridges for the Israelis. That's riveting content. Additionally, Theresa is a horrible person. She's petty and spiteful from the beginning, where she dons a revealing outfit to make a guy jealous, which she calls, and I'm quoting the book here, her little black nothing dress. It's even worse knowing this guy wrote that. And then like 200 pages later, in the middle of enriching herself to the tune of billions of dollars in precious metals, she randomly invokes the guy and is all like, "Ha ha, look what you missed out on, bitch." In another instance, after flooding the world with gold and driving up the supply, thus causing prices to plummet, you know, basic economics, Theresa gets sued by investors whose portfolios just absolutely fucking tanked, and her response? To curse the lawyer representing them so that every vehicle she tries to get into breaks down. The lady's just doing her job, Theresa. Countless people just got financially castrated because of what you did, and your only concern is staying out of court? And what does the US government do? Pass a law making it illegal to sue Theresa. Super relatable, Norm. I remember when I got a speeding ticket back in 2016 and I petitioned Congress to make it illegal to fine me. You're never getting my $256, City of Avondale. Anyone who inconveniences or contends Theresa, she automatically deems an idiot, a loser, or a crybaby. Or she literally wishes that they would drop dead. Ah yes, I remember when Jesus hung from the cross, gazed upon his executioners, and told them to drop dead. A true inspiration for the God-fearing soul. And oddly enough, it seems the only people who are against her are lawyers, journalists, and Islamic terrorists. Here, Norm, I think you might make use of this, because I have a feeling you are projecting. Now, Norm would hear all this and admit that Theresa has flaws, and that makes her a good character. But once again, that's not true. Having flaws is one thing, but the flaws need to influence the story and force the protagonist to come to terms with herself. This is a niche concept called character development. What good are flaws if they never get in the character's way? If she herself never becomes a problem in the story? If she never recognizes that what she did was wrong and resolves to better herself for her sake and the sake of others? But of course, you presumably understand this being a Okay, that's enough of that. Now I'd like to examine another page of Norm's website, one aptly titled Genius. Here he lists 10 points that classify Empress Theresa as a novel that raises the bar of modern-day writing in many ways. Point 1. The story is about a teenage girl just setting out to find her place in the world. No, it ain't. How exactly does reshaping the world to your whim equate to trying to find your place in it? There's a sort of passivity and an acknowledgement of your limitations in that assessment. We can't all be alien superheroes who reap international admiration, Norm. Point 2. Young adult novels deal with teenage problems or fantastical sci-fi scenarios. This book features young people dealing with a realistic adult world. Again, alien superhero who can shuffle the world like a Rubik's Cube, and again, a view on world affairs that's hopelessly reductive and idealistic. This vision of the world in Empress Theresa makes Star Wars look gritty and grounded. Point 3. Empress Theresa is fun to read. Most stories written today are too grim. No, it ain't. It's a slog to get through and it made me want to choose violence. Now, to be honest, I do kind of agree with what he said about a lot of stories being too grim. That's what inspired me to write my book, Hell's Gulf. I have a book, by the way, links in the description. Because at the time, I was reading a lot of horror that, while being well written, was also overly serious and bleak. So I wanted to write something wacky and unhinged, thus, Hell's Gulf was born. Shameless plug aside though, I doubt what Norm considers grim is what everyone else considers grim, and even in the most depressing of stories, there is light for those with eyes to see. But that's another conversation. Point 4, Empress Theresa is an outstanding role model. No, see my review. Point 5, Empress Theresa has simplicity. No, it doesn't. It's convoluted, it's pseudoscientific, there's plot points that go nowhere, and so much nonsense happens that it's impossible to keep track of. Apparently someone actually proofread this thing. Were you in a pitch black room, Pierre? Point 6, Theresa is thrown onto the world stage with huge responsibilities. The only thing that can get her through these trials is her character. Again, I gave credit for at least addressing those realities, but they're in no way expanded upon enough to be considered genius. Also point 4. Point 7. Empress Theresa illustrates emotional and intellectual development. No, see my review. Points 8 through 9. Empress Theresa dares to mention God and his involvement in human events. Her faith is the source of her triumph. Actually, Hal is the source of her triumph, an otherworldly entity that randomly bestows her with godlike powers. She could not have done anything in the book without Hal. Faith, religion, God had nothing to do with it. Anything supernatural beyond Hal has zero presence or impact in the story. It's all aliens. Point 10. Is Empress Theresa a Christian novel? You decide. No, but you're definitely trying to push something, and you're not very good at it. Whew, boy, my jaw hurts. But that's about it regarding the book. There's just a few more closing remarks that have to be said. Empress Theresa is a terrible book, and it's probably the worst book I've ever read. There is so much more to it that I haven't addressed simply for the sake of time. But ultimately, this video is as much about Norman Boutin as it is Empress Theresa. And it's not just because it's easy to pick on him. I gave a lot of background and context to the kind of person this man is, but ultimately you can tell just as much about him by reading the novel. Empress Theresa is a very personal book, in that you can determine all of Norm's opinions, biases, and perspectives on himself, other people, and the world. The characters are bland and agreeable, the story is unchallenging, and even the writing style is plain and colorless, because anything else would have gotten in Norm's way. Because ultimately, Empress Theresa is not a story. It is the Norman Boutin manifesto. And based on what we've read, it is the manifesto of someone who, in my opinion, is egotistical, delusional, and disturbed. And let's not pretend that other authors haven't inserted their beliefs and opinions into the stories they tell. C.S. Lewis used prose to preach his views on religion, politics, and society. The difference, however, is that despite Lewis's messaging, he recognized a truth that all writers must embrace. When you write, your obligation is for others. You write stories so readers can enjoy them, and by extension create value via their entertainment, introspection, or inspiration. Norm can claim otherwise all he wants, but he did not write Empress Theresa so readers could enjoy the story. He wrote Empress Theresa so readers could enjoy him, his opinions, his solutions, his desires, likes, and dislikes. And when you write a story that's ultimately for yourself and not for others, then you failed to write a story. Now, there is one thing in Empress Theresa that I did not talk about, but I think is the final nail in the coffin for how uniquely bad this book is. In the story, Theresa uncovers the skull of Joan of Arc buried in a church in London and presents it to the people of France, much to their tearful gratitude. Now, as anyone learned on the subject could tell you, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake, and her remains were dumped in the Seine River. See, back in 2002, Norman Boutin published an article arguing that Joan of Arc did not get burned to a crisp, but rather died a relatively peaceful and painless death via heat stroke and smoke inhalation. The going theory is that he ultimately believes this is a more pleasant and dignified death, as opposed to getting burned at the stake. You know, as if that isn't a massive insult to Joan of Arc's conviction and courage. Predictably, readers did not take kindly to this self-serving historical revisionism. So, I believe it's fitting to give Empress Theresa a conclusion worthy of the real Joan of Arc. Oh, I also need to get into the right wardrobe for this, so, excuse me. Alright, always remember to practice proper fire safety and, stay in school.